31 years of victims' rights here in Arizona. Today, we are here to honor this milestone and celebrate those who strive every day to support all crime victims.
Keep fighting the good fight for victims out there. Our cause is just. Victims deserve nothing less.
We honor the hard-working professionals who help guide victims of crime through this process.
On behalf of Governor Doug Ducey, to honor the troopers Brickland and Cutler.
I would like to thank everyone watching today for all the hard work you do on behalf of every victim here in Arizona.
This award means a lot to me to show that I'm supported, I'm recognized.
I can't be more honored to receive this award. Streetlight is a labor of love.
The greatest honor of receiving this award is that I get to honor my team.
It recognizes the importance of Child Crisis Arizona to the community, to the children, and to the families that it serves.
It has been our honor to commemorate Victims' Rights Week with all of you. Hopefully next year, we'll all be meeting in person. Welcome to the 2021 Crime Victims' Rights Awards. I'm Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovich. Even though COVID-19 forced us to meet virtually this year, it didn't stop us from celebrating 31 years of victims' rights here in Arizona. Today, we are here to honor this milestone and celebrate those who strive every day to support all crime victims. Our theme this year, Support Victims, Build Trust, Engage Communities, emphasizes the importance of leveraging community support to help victims of crime. Delivering today's invocation is Dr. Paul Ellis from the International Conference of Police Chaplains.
Would you bow with me and pray with me in your own faith tradition? Heavenly Father, as we open this time together, we ask with the psalmist David, I will lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Lord, we invite your presence to be with us, for we need your help. We gather to remember those who have been tragically wounded as victims of crimes, and as we set aside this time to prepare ourselves to serve them, we need your wisdom, your understanding, and your compassionate heart. We know that you see each little sparrow that falls from the sky, and we know that you love and care for each and every child of yours. Help us to be instruments of your love and care for those we serve. We pray that you bring healing to those who have been violated by crimes against them or their loved ones. Bring comfort to those who grieve and suffer from the effects of the wrong done against them. Help us as we prepare to train to help those who are hurting. Together we pray for those who have watch over us, for our president and our nation's leaders, and for our governor who faithfully and compassionately cares for this great state of Arizona. Continue to guide them and those who serve with them in government. Give them the wisdom and direction to provide legislation and leadership for our people so we can live in safety, security, and peace. I thank you for their dedication and commitment. I pray for our first responders, our law enforcement and fire personnel. Guide them, protect them, and provide wisdom as they carry out their calling by protecting us and providing us a sense of security to our communities. May we be encouragers and supporters of those who have watch over us. I ask for your blessing on each one who is gathered here to prepare for service to our community and citizens. May they have open and receptive minds, a heart of compassion for people, and may they leave this event with the encouragement and inspiration they need to make a positive difference in the lives of those they serve. May God bless us, and may God bless this great state of Arizona. Amen.
I often say that a society will ultimately be judged by how it treats the most vulnerable. Attorney Paul Cassell has been fighting for victims' rights for decades. Today, he's involved in one of the most high-profile national cases, defending the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Cassell.
It's great to be here remotely and to talk with you about how we can support victims, how we can build trust, how we can engage communities, and generally how we can support crime victims in our criminal justice process. I know there are lots of different kinds of professionals that are here today. My background, as I think may have just been mentioned, is as a victims' rights attorney. I've done a lot of different cases and legislative work where I've tried to support victims and victims' rights. And so my interest is in that strengthening of victims' rights as a way of engaging and supporting communities. And I've tried to use some of my legal skills to support victims. I know that there are lots of other ways that victims can be supported. I know that many people here today provide emotional support or other kinds of support for victims throughout the process. I want to talk about the area that I have worked in, crime victims' rights, because I think that can help lay the foundation for protecting victims and supporting victims in so many ways. And so what I want to do is talk about the trajectory of crime victims' rights over roughly the last 40 years, the way that legal rights have developed for crime victims. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that I have done over the last couple of decades on victims' rights that maybe help to illustrate that trajectory. And so I hope this is a useful kickoff for what I'm sure will be an exciting conference. I'm sorry I can't come down to Arizona to be with you personally, but hopefully as the world gets back to normal, maybe we'll have a chance to meet in person and talk about some of these things. I also want to mention oftentimes in these keynote remarks or other kinds of remarks, we end up highlighting failures in our criminal justice system. Obviously, it's useful to look backward and try to figure out what's gone wrong in particular cases. Today, I want to also try to highlight a lot of successes that the crime victims' rights movement has had, because I think it's important to recognize not just our disappointments, but our successes. And I do think we've made significant progress as a movement over the last several decades. So let me just talk briefly to sort of set the stage about historically where crime victims were a little over 200 years ago when our country was founded. And then I think what we've seen is a trajectory where victims kind of faded away from our criminal justice system, and we're now on an upward arc as victims begin to return to the prominence they had in our criminal justice system. If you went back in this country to, I don't know, around 1780, 89, give or take, when our country was being founded, when our Constitution was being drafted, and you went into courtrooms around the 13 original colonies, what you would see is a criminal justice system that looked very different from the system that we're familiar with today in Arizona or my home state of Utah or elsewhere. If you went back more than 200 years ago, what you would see is a system of what's called private prosecution. That is, private citizens were responsible for initiating and bringing their own criminal justice cases. And so somebody, I don't know if a rancher or somebody lost a cow, it was the obligation of the rancher to try to identify the wrongdoer and ultimately maybe bring that person to justice, use a constable to file charges, but then it would be the victim's obligation to pursue those cases in the court system, to bring their own private prosecution. Now, for various reasons, sliding over now about 150, 160 years of American criminal justice history, that system of private prosecution was displaced by a system of public prosecution. And so over time, the public prosecutor's offices that you're well familiar with there in Arizona came to the forefront, handled criminal cases, pursued cases even if the victim did not want to pursue or was unable to pursue cases. And so as public prosecutors came to the forefront and took over our criminal justice system, crime victims slid to the backdrop. They became less involved. Indeed, in a very famous article in 1976, Professor William McDonald wrote an article called Toward a Bicentennial Revolution, the Return of the Victim, and talked about this history of private prosecution, talked about how victims now only showed up in the criminal justice process if they were summoned to the court by prosecutors or defense attorneys. And he noted that this was a departure from the original vision or the original place that victims had in our criminal justice process, and he proposed restoring victims to a place of prominence in our criminal justice system. And MacDonald was not the only one who was thinking along those lines. If you look in the country around that time, you see a lot of interest in crime victims' rights. Interest that came from across the political spectrum, from people who were interested in law and order and protecting public safety, to the civil rights movement that noted that African Americans and other disadvantaged persons in communities around the country were unable to obtain the same kind of justice, the same kind of protection that other more empowered citizens were able to obtain. The women's rights movement noted that, for example, rape victims were frequently the target of attacks in criminal justice proceedings. And so there was this interest from a variety of different perspectives in protecting crime victims' rights and promoting crime victims' rights. And this coalesced in 1982 when President Reagan appointed a task force on crime victims' rights in the criminal justice process. They issued a report that had more than 100 recommendations for protecting crime victims in the criminal justice process. A lot of those recommendations were things that I think you and I almost take for granted when we look at the way crime victims are treated in our criminal justice process. Among the recommendations, for example, were crime victim compensation and crime victim restitution if an offender was convicted. Also, bail reform. Setting up a system where if a judge found that a defendant was a great danger to the community or a danger to perhaps the victims or witnesses who would be testifying against him, that defendant could, after a court hearing, be detained. Also, the task force recommended privacy protections for crime victims to make sure that their addresses or telephone numbers wouldn't be automatically disclosed to defense attorneys. And also the proposal was that there be victim impact statements by victims during court sentencing or during parole proceedings that might follow later on, giving victims an opportunity to have a voice in the criminal justice process and to shape the outcome of court sentencings or parole board proceedings. Perhaps the most sweeping recommendation that the task force made was that there should be a federal constitutional amendment protecting victims' rights. The task force noted that the Bill of Rights provides victims for criminal defendants the right to counsel, the right to a trial, those sorts of things. And shouldn't victims have the same kind of protections in our nation's fundamental charter, in our Constitution? And so in 1982, the task force recommended that there be a federal constitutional amendment. Well, that's a daunting prospect. To get a federal constitutional amendment, you need to have 2/3 of both houses of Congress agreeing to propose a constitutional amendment to the states. And then 3/4 of the states have to agree that there is a need for a constitutional amendment and to ratify a constitutional amendment. And so the crime victims' rights movement got together following that recommendation. In 1985, there was a meeting organized by the National Organization for Victim Assistance, or NOVA. It involved the Mothers Against Drunk Driving, also the Sonny Von Bulow National Victim Advocacy Center, which is currently the National Crime Victim Center. Got together and said, look, we need to push this idea of a federal constitutional amendment, but we need to set the groundwork for that, since 3/4 of the states will ultimately have to approve. And so the victims' rights movement decided to go with what's known as a states first approach. Let's go to the states, said the movement. Let's try to figure out what kinds of language works to protect victims, what kinds of rights would be appropriate, what kinds of enforcement mechanisms would be useful. And so that began in 1986 with the first passage of a state constitutional amendment protecting victims' rights in the state of Rhode Island. In 1990, Arizona passed what I think is generally regarded as a model of crime victims' rights protections, adding a state constitutional amendment to the Arizona Constitution, providing a Bill of Rights for crime victims in Arizona. And in 1991, your legislature added very strong implementing legislation designed to make sure that victims had rights. And so in 1992, after the Arizona Amendment was in place, during, ironically enough, Crime Victims' Rights Week, I was involved here in Utah with our Crime Victims' Rights organizations, holding a conference very similar to the one that you're holding. And interestingly enough, we had a keynote speaker at that meeting, and the speaker was Steve Twist from Arizona. Some of you may know Steve. He was, I think, one of the principal drafters of your Arizona constitutional amendment. Also a drafter, interestingly enough, of a victim's rights, a victim's bill of rights for the Navajo Nation there in Arizona, and someone who I think it's fair to say has been one of the most prominent leaders in the crime victims' rights movement for many years. And he gave a keynote address that called on states, such as my home state of Utah, to pass state constitutional amendments protecting crime victims' rights. And I got a chance to meet Steve in 1992 and began a lifelong friendship with him and a lifelong collaboration with him, working to promote victims' rights in Utah and Arizona and around the country. And I took his words to heart, along with my colleagues in the victims' rights movement here in Utah. And in our next election cycle in 1994, we passed a Utah state constitutional amendment protecting victims' rights, patterned to some degree on the Arizona amendment, although unfortunately our amendment was not nearly as comprehensive, and I think it's fair to say not nearly as effective as the Arizona amendment. And so Utah added an amendment, many other states added amendments. Congress also began passing federal legislation protecting crime victims' rights to be heard, right to attend court proceedings. And so the victims' rights movement was making great progress in the mid-90s, although I think it's fair to say that the progress was somewhat uneven. And in 1996, I started working on a case, the Oklahoma City bombing case, where victims had been promised the right to attend court hearings in a federal statute. And yet the judge presiding over the Oklahoma City bombing proceedings did not give victims the right to attend court proceedings. He said, look, if any victim wants to provide a victim impact statement, if any family member wants to provide a victim impact statement about the impact of losing a loved one, that makes them a witness in the case and they have to be excluded from the courtroom. And so I worked to represent 35 victims of the Oklahoma City bombing, victims and family members, and argued to the district court and ultimately to the 10th Circuit that they had a statutory right to attend court proceedings. Those efforts were unsuccessful. Ultimately, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit concluded that the federal law in place at that time did not give crime victims standing to enforce their rights. And following that, we got Congress to quickly pass legislation trying to extend standing to victims, but none of that was effective in getting victims into the courtroom for the Oklahoma City bombing case. A case, I think it's clear, where the nation was paying attention, the media spotlight was on, and you would expect victims' rights to be honored. And so if victims' rights weren't honored in the Oklahoma City bombing case, I think we all understand what the situation would be in other court hearings where the spotlight isn't on and maybe the nation's attention isn't quite so well focused. I'm sure many of you have seen situations like that in your experience. And so because of those problems in making sure that the culture was changed, that crime victims' rights were fully respected, in 1996, the victims' rights movement went to President Bill Clinton and gained his support for a federal constitutional amendment protecting victims' rights. And in June of 1996, President Clinton held a Rose Garden ceremony in which he announced his support for crime victims' rights. Congress then began considering the amendment. I testified in support of the amendment several times, as did Steve Twist and others around the country. And in 2002, I became a federal judge here in Utah. I had the opportunity to serve in that capacity. And so I wasn't engaged in the victims' rights movement directly when in 2004, Congress took a careful look at the federal constitutional amendment. It was clear that a majority of both houses of the Congress supported constitutional rights for crime victims. But remember, you need 2/3 support to pass a federal constitutional amendment, which did not exist, sadly, in 2004. And so at that point, the crime victims' rights movement, this time speaking through its spokesperson, Steve Twist, worked very carefully with one of your home state senators, Senator John Kyle, on a bipartisan basis with Senator Dianne Feinstein and many other senators and congressmen and women to put together the Crime Victims' Rights Act, a federal statute providing a list of rights patterned somewhat on the Arizona state amendment to protect victims' rights throughout the criminal justice process. And I got a chance to see how the Crime Victims' Rights Act was implemented since I was a federal judge at the time. And in my cases, I tried to make sure it was followed, but it was clear to me that the Crime Victims' Rights Act was only being unevenly implemented. And so at that time, I decided to resign my federal judgeship, to return to law teaching here at the University of Utah College of Law, and to pursue my passion, which was to advocate and to litigate on behalf of crime victims throughout the criminal justice process, throughout states. I've argued some cases in Arizona and argued a number of cases in the federal system, and tried to make sure that these rights that are being passed in statutes and in state constitutional amendments are not just observed in the breach, but are observed in day-to-day practice of our court system. And so in 2008, I got an interesting telephone call from some of my friends in Florida, and they told me there was this case involving a sex trafficker by the name of Jeffrey Epstein, and that the federal government was cooking up some kind of a plea deal with him where they were not telling the victims what was going on. And so in early July in 2008, that's 12, almost 13 years ago, along with my friend Brad Edwards, we filed a challenge to the government's secret plea deal with Jeffrey Epstein. And that case, I think, illustrates that even again, in a nationally prominent kind of case, all too often, crime victims' rights are not fully protected. What happened in that case was Jeffrey Epstein was well connected politically, very wealthy, able to afford the best possible legal representation. And so he arranged a deal where he would not be federally prosecuted for sex trafficking. Instead, he would plead to a low-level state charge and be on work release, where he would go to his fancy office building during the day and would return to a jail only at night to sleep. And there would be immunity for all of the other participants in his sex trafficking organization. And so we challenged that as a violation of the victim's right to confer under the Crime Victims' Rights Act, because victims are entitled to confer in the federal system about charges and what's going on, and that was not done in the Epstein case. Litigation followed for, as I say, more than a decade. In 2016, Brad Edwards and I filed a motion for summary judgment in the case that the victims' rights had been violated. And in 2019, the judge there agreed with us, said that the federal government had an obligation to confer with victims before it reached the deal that it reached. But then that summer, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested and later committed suicide. And so the federal judge in that case threw out our challenge after a decade, saying that the case had become moot. And so we appealed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. And what we argued was that the case was not moot because the co-conspirators of Jeffrey Epstein still have immunity under this secret and illegal plea deal, and they should be prosecuted. And that case continues. We lost 2-1 in front of a panel of the 11th Circuit. In December, just a couple of months ago, I argued a case on rehearing en banc before the 11th Circuit about how victims should be able to move forward with the challenge to hold Epstein's co-conspirators accountable as well. And so those are some of the developments in the federal system. The state system continues also to move forward with victims' rights. By around the turn of the century, 35 states or more had passed state constitutional amendments protecting crime victims' rights. But I think it's fair to say that the strength of those amendments varied from case to case and state to state. And so now there is a new wave, a second wave of crime victims' rights being pushed at the state constitutional level. This owes its support to Dr. Henry Nicholas, who is one of the co-founders of Broadcom. His sister Marcy had been murdered in California by her ex-girlfriend, and the victim's family was mistreated throughout the system. They weren't notified when he was released and suffered many of the other indignities that I'm sure you've seen in your experience in some of the cases you've worked on. And so in 2008, Steve Twist, who seems to be ubiquitous in the history of the crime victims' rights movement, helped to draft the Marcy's Law in California. I had a chance to work on the drafting as well. And in 2008, the voters approved an amendment updating California's state constitutional amendment and providing strong standing and enforcement for crime victims' rights there. In 2014, a Marcy's Law was added in Illinois. In 2016, North and South Dakota came on board. In 2017, Ohio. 2018, Florida, Georgia, Nevada, North Carolina, and Oklahoma added Marcy's Law. 2020, Kentucky, and other states are working to add Marcy's Laws or other strong state constitutional protections for crime victims' rights. Now, some states may not need a Marcy's Law amendment. Perhaps Arizona is one of those because it has such a strong state constitutional amendment. But other states do need help in strengthening victims' rights. And I continue to think that even state constitutional amendments that are very strong may not be enough to ultimately provide the kind of cultural shift that we need to make sure that judges, defense attorneys, prosecutors, everyone respects crime victims' rights throughout our criminal justice process. And so during this Crime Victims' Rights Week, I think we should all think about ways that we can support crime victims, whether it's by passing state constitutional amendments or working to enforce existing amendments, working within the particular disciplines that you all work in and pursuing your own passions, using your own skills and determination and abilities to protect crime victims throughout the criminal justice process. Let me just close with this. I think there is a strong sense of justice in this country, a sense of justice that includes a recognition that crime victims have an important role to play in our criminal justice process. Victims are not trying to veto decisions that are being made in our criminal justice process. They're simply trying to have a voice in that criminal justice process to shape the outcome in a way that's fair not only to the state or to the defendant, but are also ways that are fair to crime victims. So let me encourage you to keep fighting the good fight for victims out there. Our cause is just. Victims deserve nothing less. And I wish you a success in your conference today. And more broadly, I wish you success in all your ways that you engage communities and support crime victims throughout our criminal justice process.
Thank you, Paul. Next, I'd like to take a moment to highlight our Arizona agencies and their directors who help victims on a daily basis. The Criminal Justice Commission, led by Director Andy Lefevre. The Department of Juvenile Corrections, led by Director Jeff Hood. The Department of Corrections, Rehabilitations, and Reentry, and its Director, David Shin. The Department of Public Safety, led by Colonel Heston Silbert, and of course, Victim Services here at the Arizona Attorney General's Office. Thank you for all you do. Now to the moment we've all been waiting for, the awards.
Good afternoon. I'm Maricopa County Attorney Alistair Adele. I am delighted to be here virtually, celebrating 30 years since the inclusion of victims' rights into the Arizona Constitution, to present the Crime Victims' Rights Legacy Award, the Legacy of Compassion. From the first day I became county attorney, my office has tried to work every single day with 3 core principles guiding us: keeping families safe, holding criminals accountable, and of course, protecting the rights of crime victims. It is often said that crime victims are traumatized twice. First, by the crime itself, and then by the criminal justice system. Today, we honor the hardworking professionals who help guide victims of crime through this process. This year, I'm proud to award the Crime Victims' Rights Legacy Award, the Legacy of Compassion, to our K-9 Victim Support Program and our 3 amazing dedicated victim advocates, also called K-9 handlers, Mary Picard, Cindy Walker, and Veronica Murillo, along with their K-9s, Tori, Ellie, and Morgan. The K-9 Victim Support Program was created to use specially trained facility dogs to work with child victims. The victim advocate handlers and their dogs are trained and certified from an accredited organization, Power Paws Assistance Dogs, and receive an annual refresher training for recertification. Participating in the criminal justice system can be an intimidating experience for anyone, but especially children. The program's K-9s and advocates work together to provide comfort and significantly reduce anxiety for victims so they can attend court and participate in the prosecution of their case. Mary, Cindy, and Veronica are specialized victim advocates responsible for the day-to-day care and handling of these amazing dogs, attending trials and court hearings, and other case-related victim meetings. The MCAO K-9 Victim Support Program participates in community outreach efforts, has received many accolades, and they even have their own coloring and activity book featuring the K-9s as superheroes to help educate children about the criminal justice system. Let's take a look at this amazing team.
Power Paws is a 501c3, and we train and place service dogs. We are one of 2 agencies that are accredited in Arizona to provide the service of training. A facility dog is actually a staff person for a facility. It depends on if it's a social service, law enforcement agency, or an academic institution. And what they do is partner with that professional to do help with the tasks that are assigned to that professional. And it's actually called animal-assisted interventions.
I'm a trainer, and I try to teach them how they need to help people. Can I say hi? Oh, so cute, good girl. Good girl. And now, reinforce this calm behavior. I'm a distraction. Oh, can I say hi? Oh, so cute. Can I pet her? Yes, give her a treat.
So Morgan is amazing, and all the other K-9s have several benefits. I know when we set up a meet and greet with a minor victim, they're not coming to our office to relive good memories. So the fact that they're there, Morgan changes the dynamic once she enters the room. They become less stressed and they get distracted from what they're there for. So an icebreaker is a great benefit for what Morgan does.
We use the K-9s a lot for sentencings, all hearings, basically. The biggest one is trial, where the K-9s sit under the stand with the minor victims or victims when they're testifying.
I had an adult male victim who was there for court, and he was so anxious and upset about the court hearing that he was actually trembling and shaking. So I had Tori sit next to him in the courtroom. She actually sat or laid on his feet. And he began petting her, and you could see the shaking and the trembling start to stop.
The best thing about being a handler is the smile that Ellie brings to my face every day, even more so at work. She loves to come to work. I'm so glad that I did this.
What I enjoy the most with Morgan is that these cases aren't easy, right? So we do see the trauma that the child goes through, and there is some type of trauma that the advocate also gets. And I feel like having Morgan with me is if a hearing goes wrong, something doesn't happen, an outcome isn't what we wanted it to be, we can always come back to the office, and she is my de-stressor.
I love dogs, of course, but I just love how people just light up when they see the dogs, and how it helps make the criminal justice system such a much more positive impact in their lives.
These are truly remarkable people and service animals, and I am so proud to award them with this achievement today. Congratulations, and thank you for all that you do.
Good morning. I'm Maria Fuentes, the Director of the Governor's Office of Youth, Faith, and Family. On behalf of Governor Ducey, it is an honor to join you today as we recognize Victims' Rights Week. I want to thank you and commend everyone for being here to stand in solidarity with the victims of crime and all of those affected by it. In Arizona, we have a profound history of supporting victims. We are one of the first states to adopt a fully comprehensive constitutional amendment for victims' rights. We have extended services to victims through the victims divisions of our county attorney's offices, state agencies, and through private nonprofit organizations. And together, we stand to lessen the toll of trauma that crime inflicts on its victims. Today, we recommit ourselves to the important goals, and we stand against any attempts to weaken our resolve and our resources to achieve them. This year's national theme, Supporting Victims, Build Trust, Engage Communities, embodies the true spirit of victims' rights and services in Arizona. We support victims through laws, resources, services, and programs that promote healing to help victims thrive. We build trust by ensuring we fulfill our promises of rights and services for victims, and we continue to do so. And Arizona's communities, victim service providers, and criminal justice professionals ensure that victims of crime are empowered to carry on and thrive. I want to thank you all for your commitment to supporting crime victims and for the important work that you do in the pursuit of justice. Your dedication to providing critical services and support to those impacted by crime is second to none. Today, I call upon Arizonans to honor the courage of crime victims and those on the front lines in the fight for justice. Arizona remains committed to strengthening and enforcing victims' rights, and together we will continue to provide all victims with the meaningful services they deserve. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Colonel Heston Silbert, Director of the Arizona Department of Public Safety. On behalf of Governor Doug Ducey, I'm proud to join you today to present the Triumph Over Tragedy Award to Troopers Brent Bricklin and Brad Cudler.
Trooper Brent Bricklin, Arizona Department of Public Safety, work Metro Central.
Trooper Brad Cudler, I'm a trooper with the Department of Public Safety.
Originally, Brad called out that he had seen what he thought was a collision on I-17.
On December 26, 2016, I was just on routine patrol. I notified dispatch. As soon as I got on scene, I received an update to my call that there was a shooting.
Good evening. We're starting with breaking news. 2 people have been shot on I-17, and the freeway right now is shut down in both directions at Thomas.
As I was en route, Brad stated over the radio that he had a gunshot victim, and then continued on to say that he had seen the gunman running on the freeway.
I was met with a frantic female. She told me that her boyfriend had just been shot. They were just going out for ice cream, and this guy just started shooting with no care in the world. I met her boyfriend who had actually been shot, and he was not able to move. I recognized that there was a male that was running across the freeway. That's when Trooper Bricklin arrived on scene.
So I stopped my vehicle real quick and got out, engaged the gunman, and then we took the suspect into custody, treating his wounds.
It was very fast. We later found out that he had terrorized dozens of people. One person has been paralyzed from the waist down.
I ended up getting asked by one of the victims in the ambulance to be there as much as I could, and since I was there almost every single day of the trial.
A situation happens like that, our adrenaline goes up.
That time you're terrified that your life's over at that point. Most people don't go through things like that, so it was just being there for them.
I have to thank our training here at DPS.
It was the right thing to do. Someone needed help, so that's why we're there.
We met under pretty significant violent circumstances, and I think that's, kind of forms a different connection. It's definitely made me a better cop. It's made me a better field trainer. To take the good away from it, not the bad.
I'm here to do my job. I didn't do what I did for recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do.
When a trooper responds to an incident like this, it takes a toll on everyone. Family, friends, loved ones, and the troopers themselves. The violent encounter that took place on December 26, 2016 impacted many lives, and it could have been worse if not for the courageous actions of Troopers Bricklin and Cudler.
And now to my office's annual Distinguished Service Awards. Let's begin with our Innovative Practices Awards, which is for those who have developed programs or services to help victims in a groundbreaking way. This year's awards for Innovative Practices goes to Cindy Woods. Cindy is a victim compensation program advocate from the Mohave County Attorney's Office. Congratulations, Cindy.
I work for Victim Services, and we do notifications, restitution. We have a restitution advocate. We have a domestic violence advocate. We have a volunteer coordinator, and we have some other notification people here.
She's usually dealing with the next of kin or family members or close friends. So they're already going through a traumatic experience. And so Cindy tries to help them through that part, trying to reach out to as many local community members as possible.
In August of 2019, Cindy became aware of a boating accident fatality that happened on Lake Mead here in our county, involving a high school senior. Friends of the victim's family were reaching out to the community for support, and the family did not know what had happened yet. Cindy made the effort to contact the family through social media, was successful in doing so, and then continued to assist with the case as it went on.
I really like helping victims. It gives you a lot of gratitude to see victims appreciate our help, our support, going to court with them, because they're just kind of lost in the system. It really helps to ease their mind of what they're going through the process.
Cindy has a great big heart, and she shares that with our community. She was a volunteer at our local hospital, and during that time, she's helped a tremendous amount of people. So she doesn't even help people just here at the office, but she also helps people in our community on her own time.
The whole office works together as a team, so I think that's very important.
I think it shows just how good Cindy is at her job and just how well that Arizona supports the smaller communities.
This award means a lot to me, to show that I'm supported, I'm recognized by my peers, my supervisor, by my manager, the attorney's office. I really am humbled that I am getting this award.
The next award is for service coordination. This is for an individual instrumental in creating comprehensive and coordinated approaches to serving all crime victims here in Arizona. This year's winner of the Service Coordination Award goes to Skye Steele. Skye is the CEO of StreetLightUSA. Congratulations, Skye.
When I was in college, I had the opportunity to be witness to a lot of exploitation of young girls and young women. And at the time, I didn't realize what I was seeing. I didn't know that what I was seeing was human trafficking. Well, fast forward 10 years, when human trafficking started to make a mark and started to get the attention of the community, and I realized what I had been seeing and what I had been witness to. And so from that moment on, I realized, okay, this is why I was allowed to view, to be witness to, and to see young women and children be exploited. And so from that moment on, I just had a drive to do something. And ever since then, it's been 100 miles an hour going forward, making a difference in the lives of young women and young girls in our community.
There's good news and bad news, I think, in Arizona. And the bad news is that human trafficking is real. We know that now. It's not a mysterious thing that we can't really quantify or that we don't see the victims. It's not as hidden as it once was, even though now a lot of it's migrated to online. We see the victims now. We see what's happening. The good news is that Arizona cares.
Skye is incredibly passionate. She's probably the most passionate person I've ever met. I didn't know anything about human trafficking before I started working here. And just to have her be able to sit down with me and explain to me her passion about why she wants to save these children hooked me in about 2.5 seconds.
Skye is amazing. She sets the tone for everything that we do here at Streetlight. I feel like her main role is to constantly cast vision of why we do what we do and the way that we should be interacting with the girls and the way that we come alongside them in their healing journey.
My sort of selfish hope is that this award will help to not only deeply honor her, which I know she'll be really honored by this, but my hope also is that it'll draw even more attention to this model that they've built.
I can't be more honored to receive this award because I will tell you that Streetlight is a labor of love. It takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears on the parts of my team and of myself.
Next up is the Leadership Award, which is for a person who serves as a model leader in the fight for better treatment for all crime victims. This year's award for leadership goes to Melissa Brickhouse-Thomas. Melissa manages the Victims Assistance Unit in the Glendale Family Advocacy Center. Congratulations, Melissa.
The Glendale Family Advocacy Center is a one-stop location for victims of crime where they can get an investigation for whatever victimization has happened or whatever crime has occurred against them. But at the same time, they're going to get healing resources and victim services to try to help jumpstart that healing process after a crime has occurred.
We're very excited that she's being recognized for this award. This is something that we've all known about her for a very long time. She's probably the model of servant leadership. She is somebody who has been here and tirelessly is involved in every step of the process.
When I read the qualifications for this award, Melissa immediately stuck out in my mind of this Distinguished Service Award that she has given so much of her time, her effort, her energy, everything she can to helping the citizens of Glendale, the victims of crimes.
She's just constantly thinking about new ways that we can better serve crime victims to make that trauma healing journey a little bit easier for them and a little bit of a smoother transition. She also inspires us because she's always upbeat, positive, and she just makes us want to be better and holds us to a high standard.
It's about time. You know, I'll be honest, she's been doing it for several years and she's been deserving of this award for many, many years, and I'm so thankful and happy that she was able to get it.
The greatest honor of receiving this award is the fact that I get to honor the phenomenal work that my team does on a day-to-day basis. The advocates here at the Glendale Family Advocacy Center and with the Glendale Police Department, they work diligently day in and day out to make sure that crime victims get the most compassionate, trauma-informed advocacy that they deserve.
This award epitomizes her and her selflessness and the dedication that she's given to the Advocacy Center, the city, and we couldn't exist and do what we do and provide the services we do without Melissa.
Last but certainly not least, we turn to the Advocacy and Direct Service Award. This is presented to an organization that has shown passion and perseverance in facilitating victims' justice and healing. This year's winner is Child Crisis Arizona. Congratulations, Child Crisis Arizona, for receiving the Advocacy and Direct Service Award. Thank you.
Child Crisis Arizona exists to prevent child abuse and neglect and to make sure that all children and youth in Arizona have a safe place.
I nominated Child Crisis Arizona because I want this organization to be recognized for everything that it does for the community.
There are so many children out there right now. They need safe spaces. They need a safe home. They need loving caregivers.
What really got me involved was the children. All you have to do is go to one fundraiser that the Child Crisis Board puts on, and you'll immediately be impressed about what we are capable of doing for the community.
We are all here to make this world a better place. And if there is something that we can all do to change our community, to change the opportunities that everybody has to have a healthy family, that keeps us inspired. Why wouldn't we want to help? How can we not help?
It recognizes the importance of Child Crisis Arizona to the community, to the children, and to the families that it serves, and recognizes how important it is to continue those services for the state of Arizona. We have a crisis of children in the foster care system who need protection, and this award recognizes how Child Crisis Arizona is helping us to meet the demand for those services.
It is a recognition that what they do is not only good, significant, but it's recognized. And when you get recognized, it helps the people that are involved feel more connected, more bonded, and want to even go further than they do.
It means a lot to us because everybody is paying attention. And we all know that the children are our future. And when we feel that people are working with us to support the children so that we can all have a great opportunity, it feels really good. So thank you for this award.
Before we conclude, I would like to thank everyone watching today for all the hard work you do on behalf of every victim here in Arizona. Truly, thank you. It has been our honor to commemorate Victims' Rights Week with all of you. Hopefully next year, we will all be meeting in person. Take care. Stay safe.